Welcome to the Lair of Secrets podcast about gaming and being a geek by two 40-something geek dads. I'm David Moore, and it's been a strange few weeks, and I'm not really sure who I am anymore.
And I'm Ken Newquist. I'm a guy who loves a good, scary graphic novel, trying out new backpacking gadgets, and investigating small-town murder mysteries, including the disappearance of a co-host. So David, what have you been up to?
Right. Yeah. So, speaking to your disappearance of a co-host, Brindlewood Bay. It's a game literally based on the idea of you're playing Murder, She Wrote, which was a TV series, I think, back in the 80s.
That sounds right.
We went for a while with Jessica Fletcher. She was a writer in the town, and she's ended up getting caught up in murder mysteries all the time. And so Brindlewood Bay, the designers of Brindlewood Bay, thought that that was a cool concept, and went with the idea that you are a member of the Murder Mavens, and you are somehow brought into all of these murder mysteries in Brindlewood Bay, and you need to solve them. This isn't a spoiler, you all know as players and stuff when you're going into it, but there's a more sinister thing other than murder going on in Brindlewood Bay that is a kind of a supernatural element to it. There's a secret society that is trying to bring about the end of the world, or whatever their plans are. And as you play through multiple murder mysteries, you begin gathering more and more clues about this secret society, leading up to some sort of climactic confrontation. What may not have come across was when you're a member of the Murder Mavens, you're basically a group of women in their, I would say, 60s through 80s year old, and you're all part of a weekly book club. And you all read a particular series of mystery novels and are totally enthralled by those. And that has given you, that and your past have given you all the tools that you need to solve these murders when the local law enforcement can't. First game was fun. Ken is in it. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I gotta say it's challenging, right? Because part of the shtick is that it is not you're kind of building the mystery as you go, right? And so it's kind of like a framework for role playing where you're discovering the clues, but we don't necessarily know what the mystery. We're building the mystery as you go, as opposed to, say, something like Trail of Cthulhu, where all the clues are there. You're going to discover them over time, but there is actually a larger mystery that the author wrote.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that really drew me to Brindlewood Bay is, and I am totally going to steal it for other role-playing games, is most of the murder mysteries are 1 or 2 sheets of paper, and most of those sheets of paper are they call them the suspects, but basically everyone who's involved in that murder mystery. And there's a series of clues that are listed, but there's no rhyme or reason for what the clues are or do, because what ends up happening is after the Murder Mavens have discovered a certain number of clues, they come up with their theory of who done it, and they roll an actual check, adding in the number of clues to it, and if they get over a certain results, they're correct. And so there isn't... It's not like a typical murder game where there's like one clue might lead to another clue, or one location might lead to another location. You're given several locations at the beginning. Like in this case, they were talked to by the local sheriff and who was bringing them in, and they told them where the murder happened. They told them where the body's being stored, and they told them who all was involved with it. And so basically they're now the Murder Mavens in whatever order they want to. They can split up. They don't have, they can do whatever. They can go research at the library. They can look up whatever. But it's all up to them to choose what direction they're going in. And then there's actually a skill. I'm trying to remember the name of the skill. But there's a skill that you can roll that basically says, I'm looking for a clue. And if you roll well enough, you find a clue. And then if you roll exceedingly well, you find a clue for that underlying supernatural, paranormal secret society.
Right. Yeah. So in this, I felt like, so I hadn't played it before. And so I think it reminds me some of Fiasco, where Fiasco is a game that you're doing something similar, right? Like there's a playbook. There are certain elements to that playbook that you will build upon. But at the end of the day, exactly what horrible thing is going to befall your characters, the order, the relationships between those characters, and the nature of the flip that's going to happen.
Right.
Actually, I think the flip is actually usually codified. But in any case, Fiasco is very much about building it on the fly. And I think it puts you in an interesting headspace as a player, because we're used to having a lot more structure.
Right.
And so you kind of have to like take that part of your brain off the hook and be like, no, we're building it as we're going along, and I'm just going to lean into that. And it's challenging.
Part of the reason I think I like Brindlewood Bay and some other games like it are, one, always wanted to play Fiasco and never had a chance. But I own it, read it, never had a chance to play it. But the other thing is like when you first get into role playing, you don't realize there's a plot. You don't realize necessarily that you're in a module. You're like, hey, I want to do this thing, and
right.
If you have a good GM, you can do that thing. Let me walk that back a little bit. If your GM is good thinking on their feet,
yes,
you can do that
thing.
Because there are plenty of GMs who are great, but won't necessarily be able to handle a curveball, or could handle a curveball 90% of the time, but you might be there that one day that they just can't handle a curveball. But that's what reminds me of like the early days of role playing for me, was a very loose framework, and the players drove what was happening. And that's always the game that I've liked to play. Brindlewood Bay, that was fun. And then my Sunday group, still having problems with meeting on Sundays in the summer. I'm hoping that once, now that school has started for everybody, and it's not as nice to go out to a beach or something like that, we'll have more games. I think the most frustrating part for me is, like this last Sunday, it was an hour before we were going to start, and I was like, hey, so are we gaming? And then it was like, yeah, I'm good. It's like, no, I'm not feeling so good. I'm going to have to call it. It's like, it's the last minute things.
Yeah, you can feel the wheels starting to come off the bus, and you're like, well, no, we could do this with 3 tires. We can do it with 3 tires.
Right.
And then like the engine catches on fire, and you're like, no, I can still do it. It's okay.
Yes.
We just got to nurse her in.
Yes.
And then,
yes,
they start shooting at you, and then, the metaphor explodes, as does your campaign. So
exactly. Yes. So hopefully next week, maybe. As I said, had to cancel this last Thursday because I had my second colonoscopy. I had one 5 years ago, and they found some stuff that was benign, and so they said, hey, go in again. And so found a couple pieces, a couple more things, and they snipped those out, and I'll get the results back on those in about 2 weeks. But I'm expecting those will hopefully be benign again. But they said if you start having the polyps, I'll just say it, if you start having the polyps, you will most likely continue to get polyps. But most people they really start screening for those at age 50. But I had noticed some things 5 years ago that made them say, hey, well, you should get one back then. And then, so now I'm on a regular five-year schedule. So
series of
early.
Ongoing 5-year missions.
Yes. I was prepping for that, and the prep for that is, you have to be empty. Let me just put it that way.
Okay.
And that wasn't so bad. That has never been bad in both of these times. But the stuff you have to drink, oh my gosh, tastes a little like NyQuil, like red NyQuil.
Okay.
Imagine drinking an entire bottle of it in one go. and then doing that the next morning again. So it had this really weird, horrible chemical saccharine taste. Since you do mix it with water, I highly suggest you refrigerate it, and then before you're going to have it, for a couple hours at least, and then put ice in it, and so that you don't. There's not really a smell to it that I really recognize, but you don't taste it as much. So that
Gotcha.
was
Good to know.
Yeah. So in a couple of years, when you might go in for your first, you'll have all this advice ready.
I'll have this bit of advice in the back of my head.
But overall, the procedure's fine. And it was pretty easy, and there's not a lot of recovery other than recovering from anesthetic afterward.
Gotcha.
Also, for last week, since we didn't meet last week, I totally messed up bullet journaling. And
I'm, you can't mess it up. Everybody just does it their own way.
Well, my messing
wrong answer.
My messing it up was I didn't do the migration from August to September. I've since done most of it, I think. I need to look through it again. And that's the second part of where I've messed it up, is because I was teaching last week. I didn't bullet journal at all last week because I didn't have time in the morning, and in the evening I was already dead tired and basically just watched some TV. I didn't have a lot of things to do. So I'm getting back into it. I think tomorrow will be my first real official getting back into it thing. But I'm still enjoying it and doing well with it for the most part, I think. The one thing that I'm going to start doing with it is, it's really weird because it's only just this weekend that my wife and I started talking about it, but we're going to do a 5-year plan to buy a boat and start sailing the world, partially inspired by my friend Bob. He was part of Stargate Cafe, which is a podcast audio drama from years ago. He's bought an old 40-year-old boat and has been refurbishing it a little bit. And I talked to him again this weekend, and I was like, so is the invite to go visit and sail on the boat, still open, because we were thinking about doing it, but then COVID.
Right.
So we're like, so it's like, how about next year? He's like, yeah, but you might need to fly down to the Caribbean or the Bahamas and meet us, because evidently they're going to sail the boat out, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, out through St. Lawrence Seaway, all the way down the eastern seaboard, and then tool around the Caribbean for a while.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's doing pretty well. He's not rich. That's not what I mean by doing well, but like he's got his plan for still working remotely, still having an income, and yet being in the Caribbean, hanging out on a boat, doing the stuff down there, and selling his house, getting a storage unit for maybe the stuff that they want to keep that they don't want to put on the boat, that sort of stuff. And it just sounds like a really cool situation.
Wow.
I told Erin about it, and she's always loved sailing, and she's like, that actually sounds really cool. And like when she starts doing research, she does research. Digs in and sinks her teeth into it. All this last weekend, I was doing a little bit here and there, but all this last weekend I was hearing about, it's like, okay, well, there's the monohulls and the catamarans and the trawler style. I think I like the trawler style because it'll give us a little more room, but the trawler style has an engine but no sail, so we'd have to pay for gas, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, and we're like going down the YouTube rabbit hole, plus doing a bunch of research. She's on boat brokerage sites looking at prices for boats. She then went to Facebook. Evidently, because of COVID, the prices are much higher right now. But also, if you go through a broker, the brokerage fees are much higher as well. And so she was looking through Facebook at certain ones that, and it's been significantly cheaper if you do a for sale by owner sort of purchase.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah,
I gotta say, I love the idea of sailing. I read all of the Patrick O'Brien Master and Commander books,
got it.
but I get seasick at the drop of a hat. So my son's
evidently,
scout troop.
evidently, you can get through that in like a day or so if you're on the ship for that long or on the boat.
That's what
for
they
that
tell
long.
me. That's what they tell me because
Right.
I'm terrible. I'm totally terrible, and that's one of those things. Like my son and I are going on this big high adventure backpacking trek next year. And one of the other things you can do in Scouts is a thing called Sea Base, which is a similar thing, but on the water on a sailing ship in Florida, in and around the Keys. It's like
Cool.
12 days out on a boat. And I love the idea of it, but I think I would spend the first 2 days just puking continuously,
Probably.
given prior
Probably.
experience. But I've never spent a day on a boat.
I've only gotten seasick once, and I blame not only the choppy waves but the diesel fumes as we were chugging back
That
into
will do it.
harbor. Like I was just no, I wasn't throwing up, but I was very queasy. That was the same excursion when my wife and I were the first people ever to ask for less rum in our rum punch. Yeah, you get free drinks as we're coming back. You know, it's like free rum punch, and we're just like, we just want Kool-Aid. Just we want something cold to drink, but not with alcohol in it, please. And they didn't have any of that, which is funny. That they were like, you were the first people that have ever asked for less rum. That also shows you how much we drink. So it's interesting. You know, 5 years. My kids will all be either in college or just out of college. We're definitely in the research phase, and a lot of things can change from here to 5 years. Having the plan is really kind of energized us both of like, yeah, this sounds really cool. Frankly, it really terrifies me because of all the unknowns, but that's what the research is going to get rid of, a lot of those.
Right.
And then I think last but not least is my picking up of some comics that I have enjoyed in the past. It's going to be a big letdown after the 5-year plan. But Humble Bundle had well, at least for the next 17 hours, so in the past for you guys, sorry, a Judge Dredd 2000 AD Humble Bundle. So a lot of the comics that came out of 2000 AD, including Judge Dredd, huge smash of comics. And I've really liked those for a long time. Have yet to really dig into those yet, though.
How many comics are we talking here? Are they like, is this going to take you the next 5 years to read them?
It might. Let's see. There's, so they've got Absalom, Halo Jones, Zenith, Brink, a bunch of Judge Dredd. Let's see. Let's do a quick count here. 39 comics, but the Judge Dredd ones are their case files books, so I think they're actually graphic novels. So there's like, So from what I can tell, there's like 29 graphic novels. I don't think they're individual.
Yeah, so you'll
comics.
be busy for a while.
I'll probably be busy for a while. Some of them I will be. I might read. I might not read. But I'll at least give them a chance to. I'll look at them at least to see if I want to read them. So yeah, that's where my fringe comics come in. Back when I was a Boy Scout, we used to pick up newspapers for recycling, and we'd drop them off the recycling plant, and then this was back in the day where they'd pay you by, I think it was by the ton of newspaper. So we had a bunch of pickup trucks, and then that would fund some of the Boy Scout. But the place that my dad and I would go to would be the local drugstore. And so we would get all of the old newspapers because they just rip the title part off if the newspaper didn't sell and send those back to get a refund. But that would also include all of the comic books that didn't sell and a bunch of the magazines that didn't sell, one of which was Heavy Metal Magazine, which is where Judge Dredd came, was printed in. And so, we'd pick those up, and I'd go through all the magazines and comics and stuff and read those. So it was a very cheap way to keep up with comics, but it also got me into more less mainstream comics, like the stuff that came through Heavy Metal. It was a lot of fun. I don't know, when the first Judge Dredd movie with Sylvester Stallone came out, I was pretty pumped. I thought it was okay, but not really Judge Dredd.
Yeah, I was going to say that was my understanding as well. Not having read a lot of Judge Dredd, but
well, the thing is with Judge Dredd, the tone shifts wildly depending upon who's writing it and such. So some of it can be very cartoony, like the Sylvester Stallone Judge Dredd, but it can also be super duper serious, like the Carl Urban Judge Dredd. I
was just going to say.
And so having not read Judge Dredd, I can, most people going into either of those movies might be turned off from it. But if you're a fan, you're like, oh, this is like this series of comics, and it all fit in the comic book world of Judge Dredd. Yeah, so I'll be reading for a while. And if I don't get it done within 5 years, I'll have a lot of comics to read on the boat.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow, very cool. So speaking of boats, I have been on the water, just not on a very large watercraft. So,
yeah, I was going to ask you what you were doing the last couple of weeks while I was doing all this crazy stuff.
So I went on a 10-mile canoe trip on the Delaware River.
Nice.
Which is a fairly, compared to the Mississippi, it's a small river. But it's notable, right? Like it separates New Jersey from Pennsylvania. It goes all the way down to Delaware, at which point, Delaware and Philadelphia, where it starts to get very large once you get down by Philly. And so by us, we have this thing called the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. And the story is kind of cool. Back in the mid-50s, there was a massive flood that came through, and it just completely drenched and submerged large chunks of New Jersey and Pennsylvania, including Easton. Like, I think Easton was like, I'm going to get this wrong, but it was like 18 feet underwater. I mean, we're talking, there were buildings that the high water mark was taller than me. So it's probably, I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating, but 12, like we have a bridge that goes across the Delaware. That bridge broke because the water was hitting the bottom of the bridge.
Right.
And tore, the stress just ripped the bridge apart.
Right.
So that's a significant amount of water. So I may not be exaggerating. So anyway, we got a great plan because it's
now
50s.
You know why I'm terrified of sailing at this point, because water can be very terrifying.
Water is a powerful thing. Well, don't mess with water.
Right.
And so that's what I try and teach my kids and the scouts we're with and everybody else. Like, I think people underestimate the power of water, and it gets them into a lot of trouble. But in this case, in the 50s, we had a plan, and that plan was dam everything.
Yep.
Which is to say build a dam. And
build
so
a
they
dam,
were going to build
levee, etc. Control everything.
So they were gonna build a dam largely for flood control purposes, but also for hydroelectric generation for New York City. And so they condemned this massive swath of land on the New Jersey and Pennsylvania sides of the Delaware, up probably about an hour north of me. And so then, you get into the 60s, you get into the 70s, people start pushing back against this idea and saying, well, you know what, we don't actually want the dam. But the federal government had bought all this land, so they turned it into this national recreation area, which has been a great boon for our area because now it's a great place for hiking and camping. And the Appalachian Trail runs through the New Jersey side and a wee bit, I think, of the Pennsylvania side. It's a great place to go canoeing. So it's fairly mild rapids. So the Delaware, at least the section we were on, was like class 1 rapids, which are really little ones, and ripples, which are like below rapids.
Right.
I think on our particular, because we were canoeing in August, the river was pretty low, so I think we hit one set of true class 1 rapids, which was enough to swamp one of the canoes. So it's funny. I've gone canoeing many times in my life. I have never swamped a canoe. On this trip, we swamped 2 canoes, and so I got to discover exactly how hard it is to get water out of a canoe.
It is not easy. The best way to swamp a canoe, don't pay attention to what you're doing. I'll just say that. We swamped ours, and we were talking with some friends. My wife and I, we're going, and we're getting really close to that. There was like some branches just hanging over. They're not even hanging in the water, but they're hanging at human and canoe height. And we're like, okay, we gotta go out. And we had managed to, I think if we had another foot, we would have been fine before we got to it. But when we got to it, we were sideways, and a branch hit the port side, just the very top, which of course has the most leverage to just turn it sideways, and then all of a sudden you have a cup filling with water, and the whole thing fills, and we are out. Yeah, that was the only time I've swamped a canoe, but yeah, once it starts, you're there, you're not stopping it.
Yeah, when I was a kid with my parents and my sister and I went canoeing on the Delaware. It was my first ever canoeing trip, and they approached the first set of rapids, and let's just say they perhaps were discussing their approach to the rapids more than they should have been, and perhaps we should have been focusing a bit more on the actual getting through the rapids rather than debating the merits of different ways to go through. So we went sideways.
Okay.
We hit a big rock in the middle of the river, and then the river, the canoe flips. Yep. And so then the canoe wraps around the rock because it was actually an aluminum canoe.
So it broke the canoe.
Well, no, actually it bends it back. We still have the canoe.
Oh, okay.
But so it just kind of submerged the canoe. The canoe kind of bent, and like, fortunately, there were other canoeists in the area. They came by, picked up my sister and I, and then eventually we got off of it. But that was our first and last set of rapids on that particular trip, and we didn't go canoeing with my parents again. Subsequently, my wife and I inherited the canoe, and so we've gone canoeing, especially before the kids were born. We used to do a fair amount of canoeing on the Delaware, both here in Easton and further up the river in Delaware Water Gap. But I had not personally swamped a canoe, and I still haven't. It was actually other people on our trip who had swamped it, and it wasn't really their fault. They were going through the rapids, and they just caught it a little wrong. Canoes tend to be a little tippy.
Yes.
Right, and so they were riding low in the canoe as they should, but it's just one of those things. Once you start to go, you just kind of go. It's not as forgiving as a raft. Like if you go whitewater, we also go whitewater rafting on raft, and a raft tends to bounce off of rocks. It's hard to mess those up. They're a little more forgiving. Canoes, not forgiving.
Yeah.
Definitely not forgiving.
I mean, they'll still float, just even full.
Yes,
they won't sink. So you can get all the water out of them. We were in a part of the creek that we could stand in. It was like up to our chests, but we could stand in it. And so we turned it sideways. We lifted it up over our heads and we put it back down. Getting in was fun, but
oh yes,
but that was but yeah, it is definitely not the same as a raft or a tube going down, because those just pop right back out. You might fall off, but they're fine. Unless you pop them.
So that's that's the thing. Like I think I always, the Delaware is a smaller river in the great scheme of things, but I always tell everybody who will listen to me, and listeners, you have to listen to me. I suppose you get applause. But you got to be safe, right? Like you got to wear your life vest and don't take it off just because you're in the middle of the river and it's a hot day.
Yep.
The Delaware is a river that people try and swim across, and unfortunate things happen because there's strong currents in places that you can't see, right? And so this is the thing, like talking about sailing, like there's a lot of stuff you got to learn, and learning is fun, but don't just go whatever.
Yep.
And like things like you should stay with the canoe, right? Like if the canoe swamp's going through, that's okay because the canoe is going to continue to float. Don't panic.
Yep.
As Douglas Adams taught us,
don't panic.
Do not panic.
Yep.
Don't panic.
Always have your towel.
Yes, and always have your towel. Even if your towel got soaked, it can dry out. So we've actually been spending a lot of time up in the Delaware Water Gap. So we also went for a 5-mile hike. It was supposed to be an overnight backpacking trip, but we had the remnants of a hurricane come through, and discretion being the better part of valor, we decided that perhaps backpacking in the remnants of a hurricane was not a great idea. So we turned it into a day hike.
That's probably a good idea. If not for just avoiding the mud.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah. And so this coming weekend, I'm actually going, this is going to be the trip we were going to do. So it's going to be a 20-mile, 2.5-day backpacking trip. And I get to try out my new piece of gear, which is a hiker microfilter by Katadyn. I haven't actually said this aloud.
Cool.
So this is the part I think I mentioned in one of our earlier podcasts. If people had told me that there was so much geeky gear, I would have gotten into backpacking earlier. But this is a water filtration thing. Like we're going to be hiking on the Appalachian Trail, and so there are water sources, but they are not potable water, right? You actually have to, boil your water or have some sort of filtration system for dealing with the water. And so this will be my first ever attempt at doing this. So that should be fun.
So is that how big is that? device?
It's actually pretty small. Like it's probably about the size of like your average like 1 liter water bottle, maybe a little bit
Okay.
bigger.
Okay.
It can pump a liter of water in under a minute.
Got it.
Um,
Because there's a
and I
friend of
tried
mine
it in my sink.
when he would go backpacking, he showed us something. I think it's called the Life Straw. And
Yes,
it
I have one of those
it's a
too.
very thick straw, but I think it's only like a couple of uses.
Yes.
I'm not sure, but you basically just lean down by the stream and can suck right out of it if you want.
That is the idea. We have my son and I have life straws, and we've never actually used them. Um, but you can also there's also like a gravity fed one where like if you're camping overnight and you have a stream of water nearby, and you want to get like 5 or 10 liters of water overnight, then you can basically put it into this bag. It filters it through something like a life straw into whatever water bottles you're carrying for the next
Cool.
day. So
Cool.
that should be cool. I tried it out in my sink, like I was saying. It worked. So
Okay.
I'm looking forward to trying it this weekend. And in spite of all of this, I kind of fell off my exercise routine. I think, a lot of times, I think when people like talk about the part what's working about their exercise routine, but perhaps because maybe it's a little embarrassing, you don't want to talk about your failures, right? Like we went on vacation and I've had a hard time getting back into my regular routine. Part of that was because I was doing this 10K training routine.
Mm-hmm.
And I backed off from that because I was starting to feel it too much. And I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to like hurt my knees or what have you. But
Right.
I haven't found a good substitute. I find routines keep me motivated. Like we talked about, like the 5K training routine, like having something that like, okay, and this is what you do next, and this is what you do next. So I got my bike out and rode that for 10 miles the other day. So I think
Cool.
maybe that'll be it. Find a good biking routine and get out. It's easier on the knees.
Yeah.
And at 48, you need things that are easy on your knees.
Yeah. My teaching last week and the procedure last week definitely threw me off the my own walking schedule. So I'm trying to get back into it. I even tried to get my treadmill repaired. It has basically this infinite loading bar that shows up, and I was trying to get it repaired. Tried to order the parts for it, and it's like, oh yeah, we ran out of those. Sorry.
Oh my!
But we'll give you 25% off of a brand new treadmill. It's like, oh, well, I'll talk to you about it later. So gonna see what I can do myself with the multimeter, but I don't have high hopes. I am slowly getting back into the walking, at least 6,000 to 10,000 steps a day.
Yeah, I'm actually. I've also. I mean, it hasn't been nothing, right? Like I've gone for a run here and there. I've gone for like walk here and there. I am motivated to get back to my morning walking routine because I have 9 hours left in the Wise Man's Fear.
Yeah, that was
to finish the book.
That was maybe that's what I need to do is pick up another audiobook, because that was my big motivator to go walking as much as I did. Was like, oh yeah, if I go walking, I can listen to more audiobook, so
right.
Yeah. You should do that.
And you get a good one. It becomes a real page turner.
Yes.
And we'll get into that in a little bit, but it's a great motivation to listen to stuff. And so I did, I suppose you might be able to, I didn't bring them upstairs to show you. This might fit into a workout because the books are freaking huge. I added 2 things to my summer reading list. It's the Aliens 30th edition original series comic book collection.
Okay.
So it's, I think, the original 8 issue series. Black and white art, came out in the late 80s before Aliens 3 was released.
Okay.
It's a direct sequel to the movie Aliens, and so it features the continuing stories of Hicks and Newt, taking place like 10 later.
So it diverges from the movie if it continues with their story.
So it diverges. Alien 3 nerfs the whole thing.
Got it.
So nerf isn't even the right word. Just completely obliterates this
everything.
Alternative storyline.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Alien 3, spoilers, Newt and Hicks don't make it through the first like 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
Which I always found disappointing. I think I may have actually. I'm trying to remember the right order in which I discovered these, because this was when I was first getting into comic books, and so I think I probably read the comics first, and so that was a disappointment for me. For Aliens 3 was disappointing for me for a variety of reasons. But in any case, they released this in kind of like a prestige format. It is just a huge, big, beautiful book. It's nice and thick, and the artwork is just truly fantastic. I mean, it's this beautiful black and white art. I was always partial to black and white art myself, and so that was really cool. And then I picked up the second one, which collects the follow-up series, Nightmare Asylum and Earth War, which are the ongoing adventures, and Ripley shows up at some point, and that's in color, but it's a similar, like, nice, thick, heavy book. So
cool.
Those are pretty good. And I think so. Then the other thing that's really nice about them is, as we said, originally these were the stories of Hicks and Newt, 10 years after, approximately, I'm guessing here, the events of Aliens. When Alien 3 was released, they decided, rather than kind of doing the whole like legacy thing or alternative history or whatever, they tried to retrofit it into the larger canon of Aliens. So they renamed. I wrote this down. Newt became Billy, and Hicks becomes Wilkes.
So they redid the comic books, or
when they reissued it, they changed all the names.
Okay, so these are basically
all of the reprints,
totally different people,
right? Okay. Except, they have the whole back. Like, it is strongly implied they have a very similar backstory to what we saw in Aliens, right? But they changed the names,
right?
Except for Ripley. I think Ripley was always Ripley, but Newt and Hicks. Which, I mean, the whole storylines, they don't even they don't really converge all that well with the whole larger alien mythos. It was a bad idea back then, but I'm happy to say that they fixed it. And so for these reissues, they have gone back to the original names, which is great, because then you don't have to constantly be translating them in your head, as you're reading through the book.
Right.
So
yeah, that was a business decision that was not well thought out, I think, is what it sounds like. Because if they're trying to fit it into the canon with the air quotes, where are they going to fit it in? So if it's 10 years after Aliens, but then Alien 3 has happened, but that means Ripley's dead until Alien 4. So how does that fit in at all?
It doesn't. It's just a completely 20th Century Fox nonsense, right?
Yeah.
So really not knowing how to manage a franchise is really what it comes down to. But, now Disney owns Aliens, which is
really
does that make the Alien?
Oh, that's
Queen,
true. 20th
like
Century
Alien
Fox
princess.
Oh wow,
a Disney princess.
Oh wow, I have to tell my wife. That's hilarious. I don't
possibly
know there are a few properties, I think, from 20th Century Fox that did not go to Disney, but I don't know about the Alien franchise.
I think it did, because I was reading, because Dark Horse lost the license. Marvel has it now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Then that's probably the case.
I think Predator went as well. So, but in any case, I mean, it's a good story. It might hit a little too close to home. There's a lot of conversation about infection and how people and civilization reacts to the spread of infection, and what happens when you can't contain infection. So obviously, this may not be what you're interested in reading during the COVID times. But if you're an Alien fan and you want to go back to see what an Aliens that could have been, I would recommend picking it up.
I know that one of the podcasters that we follow have followed in the past, who is also an author, Scott Sigler. He has written some short stories in the Alien that are canon in the Alien franchise. So I don't know which book it is, and I don't even know if that book is out yet, because I'm way behind on his podcast, so was just hearing it within this last year.
I believe it's Aliens Phalanx.
Yes, that is it.
And it's set, I think, with like in Greek times, right? Like it's
oh, is it?
If I remember, I think so. I'm looking. Let's see. It's medieval. So the teaser says medieval carnage meets alien as a pre-industrial society fights against extinction brought about by a massive infestation of xenomorphs.
Got it.
So
okay. That I was not aware of. So I just knew he was in it. So it might be interesting to pick up.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So I think it came out. Oh yeah, it came out earlier this year. It came out just before COVID, February 2020.
Oh, okay. That's probably
just
why
before we all went into lockdown. So
yeah,
looking for late additions to that summer reading list, because summer goes until the 21st.
Got it.
Of September, that is. So talking about books, we thought we would talk a little bit about how we like to read books.
Yep.
and different formats. And I actually I went old school for the book I just read on my summer reading list. It was I.M. Banks. I shouldn't say the latest book in the latest culture book that I've read, which is Extension. And so I rated it. I got it in print because I couldn't get it for the Kindle for whatever reason. They haven't released digital or audio versions of this, so I was forced to get the print version. And the book was broken because you couldn't enlarge the print. You had to put on glasses in order to see the text bigger.
It's like reading a PDF on the Kindle.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a. I don't know that I've actually tried that more than once.
You can I've done it with. Actually, I did it with Brindlewood Bay when I was reading it, and then I was like, nope, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to print it out. But you can pinch and zoom into certain areas, and then you have to drag with your finger. And dragging is, at least on the Kindle that I have, is pretty smooth. But then, like page turning, it does the whole flicker, and then you have to figure out where you are, etc. So yeah, it is better. My old Kindle had broken, which was one of the original ones with the keyboard on the bottom.
Ooh, really old school.
Yeah, the one that would actually read the book to you because it had a headphone jack as well. It's really hard to read on that. But my current Kindle, which is 5-6 years old now, it handles it pretty well, but not as good as like a tablet or a computer.
Yeah. So anyway, print books.
I love them. Still love them. Grew up on them. You might notice, you notice, but I don't know if we'll ever release the video of this, but I have some bookshelves behind me that go around the corner of my room. So, I love the print books. Always have. Love the smell. Being able to find exactly where you were. I have a really hard time. I know this isn't reading a fiction book or even a nonfiction book, but for gaming books, I really love print books because I get a muscle memory sort of thing of where is this rule in this book, and I'll just open the book up and there it is. And I can't do that with a PDF.
Right.
If the publisher is really good, they'll put in a good table of contents and index, but not all of them are.
Right.
I love print books.
Yeah, me too. I think I always make an effort to read at least a couple of print books during the summer. We typically go on vacation in Vermont, and when we do that, we stay with some friends who, as I think I mentioned before, they have this cabin that's very rustic, solar power, but you don't know it's going to fail, right? And so the great thing about print books is as long as you have sunlight, you can read them. The batteries don't run out.
Yep.
Yeah, if you lose them in a lake, you're kind of messed up, but they can take a lot of punishment. So if you, say if you are camping and someone throws their backpack on top of your backpack and your Kindle's not in a good case, it gets bashed. That can happen twice. Two separate Kindles. Until you finally get smart enough to get a good case.
Get a good case. Yeah.
Books can take a lot of punishment.
Yeah.
I will say, I think as I've gotten older, the font thing is definitely a challenge for me. I think it's and it's not that big of a deal to wear glasses when I'm reading, but it's a newer thing. I didn't have to do that when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these books, like the culture book that I read, the font is on the smaller side of a print paperback. If you're reading like a nice hardcover where it's got lots of line spacing and what have you, that's a little bit of an easier read. But some of these paperbacks where the text is very dense, it can be eye strain can be a thing even if you're not 40 something.
Right.
But the flip side to it is I have so many books.
Yeah.
so many books. And I have so many role-playing books. I think I probably have as many as you do on my shelf over here. And so I'm down with, when it comes to role-playing games, I definitely want to have a print book. I like having the PDF as well for different reasons, because, for looking up during a game and quick reference if I'm at a con or something like that, it's much easier to carry my iPad around than it is to carry around a big stack of books.
Mm-hmm.
But I will always, with a role-playing game, want to default to the Dead Tree edition.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're very similar to me, where Most books, unless I'm checking them out from the library, which I really love our local library. They're great. Where the last place we lived for a long, we lived there for 16 years, had a horrible library. So I hadn't gone to a library in a while, and this one is, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. If I'm not picking out books from the library, I have a really hard time letting them leave my house again. I've got a lot of books. They're in storage in the basement. They're on the bookshelves. Some of my more favorite ones are on the bookshelves here. Like I've got a family friend of ours who's unfortunately since passed away. He was really into science fiction and fantasy, and he gave me a 2-volume set of hardcovers of Chronicles of Amber series.
Oh, yes. I love those books.
I've got those. I've got a really old edition of The Hobbit that was actually given to my mom, and she gave it to me. She wasn't a big fan of The Hobbit, but she knew I was getting into fantasy and stuff, so she gave it to me. I can't let them go. I don't know about you.
I have a hard time with it. I think there are certain books I will definitely hold on to. We used to have a used bookstore that I would sell some of my books at that I didn't have, because I read so many books during my summer reading lists. Unless they're going to become a thing that I'm adding to my collection, that I'm actually collecting purposefully, rather than because I have so many books at this point. I kind of got to this point where it was like, okay, look, I could keep all of the books, but if I'm never going to read this again, and I'm not going to maybe share it with my daughter or my son, I gotta let it go, or else my wife may suggest that she may aggressively suggest that I downsize my book collection. So
got it. Yeah, I know I'm going to have to end up doing that as well. But it's still pretty cool when I'm going through and I'm getting into the the old school gamer sort of feel, and I go through my old games, but then come across a small collection of choose your own adventure books, or things like that. It's hard to let them go. I love them.
It is so very hard to let them go.
But that actually takes us right into the next one, which is I love my Kindle. I really love the e-reader for certain books, because you have it. They're all there. And even if they're not downloaded, as long as you get Wi-Fi, they're still available. I mean, if someone breaks your Kindle by throwing stuff onto your backpack when it's not in a good case, you still don't lose the books. You just have to get a new device to read them on, which can be expensive. I like the Kindle for some of that stuff. It doesn't have the tactile feel of a paperback or a hardback, but having an integrated book light is really nice too.
Yeah. So I have the Kindle Paperwhite. That was the one I had upgraded to a couple years ago, broke twice, and now I think I'm on my third one at this point, which is, folks, make sure you have a good cover.
Yeah.
On the plus side, they give you a discount for upgrading your Kindle, if you break it soon enough.
Yeah, it's worth the $15 or $20 for a good cover.
Indeed. And so it's light. I mean, some of the books I read are pretty heavy. I got one for my son as well. He's been reading the the Stormlight Archives books by Brandon Sanderson, and these are 1,200 page books. I mean, this is a significant tome, right? And so him taking that to school every day, that's a pretty heavy book. Although I think he actually had to. I don't think
there's a reason why my right shoulder slopes down more than my left shoulder, is because of all the books in that backpack. So
exactly. So I think he ended up taking lighter print books to school and reading the heavier books on his Kindle at home. But we talked about this, like he liked reading his Kindle because he likes to read on his back. And the heavy books, he would kept hitting himself in the face with the book, right? So. These are the occupational hazards.
Like reading for so long that you're going to sleep, and then the whole book falls on your face. Okay, got it.
The Sanderson book to the face is not. That's not a.
That's pretty heavy.
Nice thing.
Yeah,
pretty heavy. Yeah. So, I can make the font as big as I want. The backlighting is fantastic, especially when I'm backpacking. Yeah. The funny thing is, going to Philmont, they will not let you bring Kindles on the trail. They have a rule against electronics, and you can't bring anything with you. So, I have
no
to bring
electronics
a physical
at all.
Book. No electronics.
Got it. Okay.
Which is a bummer, and not because I want to bring all my electronics, but because a Kindle is a lot lighter when you're packing. For 12 days, right? but it's also handy for like reading at 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, you wake up, can't get back to sleep. I mean, honestly, the advice I've read is you should just get up and read. You shouldn't stay in bed and read.
Right.
But if you're going to break the rules, a Kindle makes it easier.
Yep. Even if you don't break the rules, Kindle still makes it easier because then you don't have to turn on a light.
And with backpacking, it's been so helpful. Even just car camping, like, you know, it's dusk, especially when you're camping in November or January or something like that. It gets dark really early. It gets dark at like 5 o'clock, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reading by headlamp, kind of challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I've done more than my fair share of it, or maybe totally my fair share of it. And you know, it's just, you know, you're balancing the lamp or the flashlight in your mouth or whatever, right? Like it's awkward. The Kindle makes that easier.
Yeah, I have something called the Light Wedge, which is basically all the electronics are on a side, and it is made to be right about the same size of a paperback book, and so and the main part of it is basically a sheet of acrylic, and you put it in there, and the acrylic's clear, but the edges of the acrylic are frosted. And so it's just 2 AAA batteries, and you turn it on, and there's a single LED, but then it edge lights the entire acrylic, which lights the book up, and then you can just read through that acrylic page. And it's really nice. It's not as convenient as a Kindle with a backlight, but if you have a paperback book, it's better than a headlamp. It's a little more discreet than a headlamp if you have someone in the same tent or the same bed with you and you're trying to read. Doesn't have the new book smell, though.
Does not. It totally lacks that.
If someone out there made new book smell or old book smell, I mean, there's 2 fragrances right there. You know, just some essential oils, or that would get me right there. I would totally get that. My wife once got me a candle of campfire, and you'd light it, and it literally smelled like you had a campfire, you know, in that same room. So why can't they make new book smell?
Right.
I would do that.
No, yeah, that's honestly, that's why I like to do a mix of books during the summer, because I do have the nostalgia and I do enjoy reading a physical book. But I find I read faster if I read in an ebook. Not exactly sure why, but I just kind of blow through them. I think the hardest part with an ebook is that it's difficult, and I think you alluded to this before, to flip between pages, right? Like to go back more than a few pages and go, wait a minute, who the heck is this guy? And I ran into this continuously in the culture book, where there's a lot of, like, he has very creative names for his characters, but I'm like, wait a minute, do I know this guy or not?
Right.
Right. And it was in the physical book, I could flip back to the previous chapter and say, okay, yeah, this is this person. But in an ebook and in audiobooks, which we also want to talk about, it's very difficult to kind of do that. Flip back a couple pages, flip back forward a couple pages.
Yes. Yeah, audiobooks are even harder. It's kind of that muscle memory with a physical book. You can kind of do it, but depending upon what reader you're using, you can do searches as well. So the Kindle does try and make it a little bit better in some ways. But if you don't know what you're searching for. And
there is, on the current Kindles, there's this X-ray feature where you can select a name, and it will show you the other occurrences of that name within the book, which can help you with that sort of thing. Cool. Doesn't always work, especially if it's kind of like a common name that it has issues with, or a common term that is being used. Like, obviously, the culture, it's going to go, I don't know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes.
Culture is a fairly common word.
Right. Right.
But for individual player names, individual character names, it works pretty well.
Cool.
But audiobooks, I think that I find a feature. So there's a drawback, is you can't flip around in the book trying to look up things. The benefit is it forces you to read at the pace of the book, and so I read very quickly, and so I can skip words occasionally, right? Like I'm getting all the context, but perhaps I'm not reading every last sentence. Right. An audiobook is going to force you to really read.
Yes,
the book.
Although you can speed the book up if your brain can keep up with that. Like there are some books where the narrator is really slow and very like, I don't want to listen at this speed. And they sound about normal at like 1.15 or 1.2 speed.
Right.
So I've started listening to books a little bit faster than intended. There are some narrators that I don't want to listen to faster, like Neil Gaiman, 1.0 all the time. In fact, that's my current audiobook it's an audiobook of the Sandman graphic novel.
Oh, interesting.
It's really cool because it's narrated by the narrator is Neil Gaiman, but each of the characters are individually voiced. I used to read Sandman when it was coming out in the early 90s, usually in the shop because I was a poor college student. I would read it and it was broken up into, different short stories or different stories throughout time with different characters and such. And so it was pretty cool to listen to those again because I've still kind of got the hazy visuals in my head of when I read them the first time. Some of these people, I don't know if anybody would really recognize it, but the one I definitely recognize, Andy Serkis, is actually
yes.
one of the audio people. Riz Ahmed, Kat Dennings, Taron Egerton, Neil Gaiman, James McAvoy, Samantha Morton, Babe Newirth, and Michael Sheen. And it's 11 hours. It was really good. I liked it. And it was, I recommend it. I think I had talked about A Memory Called Empire the last time we talked, or the last two that I've listened to. So I'm due another one. It feels different though. When I'm listening to an audiobook, I really want to go for a walk or do something, because when I'm reading on a Kindle or I'm reading a physical, paper book, my hands are occupied and occasionally move, to either tap a screen or turn a page. And I'm really focused on reading. But when I'm listening to it, my hands are idle and my eyes have nothing to look at. And so it's really hard for me to just listen to an audiobook and consider that reading. When I'm listening to the audiobook and I'm walking, perfectly fine. I have no problems at all. I'm totally focused on the audiobook, other than my minor amount of focus for not walking into traffic.
Always good.
Yes. But I can't just sit down in a chair and listen. I have to do something else at the same while I'm listening.
But the things I can do while listening are themselves limited. So there's a certain level of brain function. It's like a different class of so I can do it while I'm washing the dishes.
Yes.
But I can't do it while I'm working on my bullet journal. Right. Because obviously I'm trying to, even if I'm just copying tasks or just doing my weekly calendar, which is just kind of the root, looking at the screen, copying things down. I can't do it. I've tried.
It's the centers of the brain that need to be active during those tasks, or just the level of concentration. I've tried to listen to an audiobook and podcasts while working, and inevitably either I'll stop and I'll listen intently, or whatever's on and whatever's playing will just be on in the background, and until something catches my ear, I won't really be listening.
Right.
But if I were to pull out the stuff I use to make chainmail, which I haven't done in a long time, but I imagine, if I'm just putting together links with the pliers and dropping them into containers to be assembled later, that's just muscles working.
Right.
I don't have to think higher level thoughts or put things in place, just like you said, with, doing dishes, cleaning the house, whatever, does not require a lot of conscious thought.
So what I find interesting is that I have found more than a few people, including folks I respect, who do not consider audiobooks to be reading a book. It's like cheating or too easy. I've never really quite gotten the full justification of it, because someone is reading to you, and so. But to me, you're comprehending it in a and they've done some studies on this as well, which I don't have in front of me, but like you're still comprehending the book. Like when you got to the end of an audiobook, you have ingested all of the same content that you will have ingested if you had written the print book. So it's not like you didn't consume content.
Right. But it's a different, I'm not saying it's not reading. You know, it's very different than listening to a podcast, although maybe not so different. But, you know, it's different than watching a movie or watching a TV show. It's not, but like reading is with your eyes and the audiobooks is with your ears. And it is a very different set of centers of your brain that has to work in order to consume that media. Oh, dog visits.
My dogs have decided to come and say hello. So.
I don't know that I would say that it's not reading, because it's the exact same content in a lot of times. You know, yes, there are abridged audiobooks, but I don't usually go and get those. I like the unabridged versions, but it's just one of those things where I can still consider it reading, but I also don't consider it quite the same as reading it in a print or reading it on an e-reader.
I think what it comes down to in some ways is that it is a more passive activity. It can feel like a more passive activity than reading with your eyes, because with your eyes you're actively engaging the content and like you're scanning it, right? You're still comprehending it, building the scene, you know, these tableaus in your mind's eye, the same as you would if you're listening. But I think that's a big part of it, is that you're not it feels more active and less passive.
That is one thing that I have noticed that is different between audiobooks and printed word books, ebooks and print books. I have a lot easier time of seeing it in my mind's eye if I'm reading it in print than I do listening to it. And I think it has partly to do with the fact that it's audio, but partly to do with the fact of the concentration. My hands are busy, my eyes are busy, and I'm reading it in print, whereas there's a certain passivity, like you were kind of saying before, of like it's coming into my ear hole and I don't have to do anything, and I might be distracting myself with other things, and so the images of certain places don't pop into my head as much as they would maybe while reading print. Now that's not always true. You know, like the Wise Man's Fear and the Patrick Rothfuss books, the way I was listening to those, and the Sandman books, all of those were very, and maybe it's because I was walking during those, but those, I definitely had more of a inner visualization of what was going on than I have for most audiobooks, like while I'm driving.
Yeah, and I think it's easier to get distracted with an audiobook. I think, especially when you're building kind of that mental image of the book, I think, because you'll just start to think about the day, right, as you're walking. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait, what? Yeah, and you got to kind of like refocus, back up a little bit, re-listen to what you just listened to.
Yeah, I just missed the last 2 minutes of audio. What just happened?
Right.
Yes, that will definitely happen in an audiobook.
The other occupational hazard I have encountered in listening to books rather than reading them is you have no idea how anything is spelled. Right. I have no idea how anything is spelled in The Name of the Wind or A Wise Man's Fear, because I'm listening to it. Right. And it's not like they're spelling out the words as you're reading. And so I ran into this when I was reading the Wheel of Time books, where I started off in print. I went into audio. And so then I went back to print when Brandon Sanderson was finishing up the series, and I'm reading and going, who the hell is this person?
Because it's not spelled the way you think it's being pronounced.
Right. Or I'm having a debate with one of my friends about how you pronounce Aes Sedai, which is the magic using characters in the Wheel of Time books. And he's like, that's not how you say it. I'm like, well, that's how, like, the, 200 hours worth of audiobook that I listened to pronounced it. So I'm going with Aes Sedai.
When I was back reading it, I think I read up through book 4 or 5, we always pronounced it Aes Sedai, the group of friends of mine. Just the way that it's spelled and the way that English pronunciation like if you're phonetically pronouncing it, you like at least my friends and I who were all reading it about the same time, we all pronounce it that way. But but maybe that's not the way it's supposed to be pronounced.
And I have the opposite problem in print, where I'm terrible at sounding things out phonetically. I literally can remember ignoring those classes in middle school in favor of drawing space battles on my desktop. I can remember like second and third grade, the teacher talking about how to sound things out phonetically, and me being, I will never need to know this.
Little did you know.
Little did I know, right? Like, you know, it's all well and good when you're just reading the book yourself, but when you actually want to talk to someone about another character, it helps to know actually how to pronounce the words, right? So,
right.
30, 40 years on, I will admit that I was wrong.
Like the movie Willow. I got the novelization of the movie. And in the movie it's one of the females is Sorsha. But it's a very I think Irish name. And if you read it, if you had read it first and didn't know about that sort of pronunciation, I would not have pronounced that spelling. I would not have pronounced Sorsha. You know, so it's like, yeah, there's pronunciations like that all over the place that just don't quite fit English pronunciation guides.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it's the opposite with audiobooks. Is you know how everything's pronounced, but you don't know how anything's spelled. So
right. So these are the dangers of reading books. So
yes.
I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not going to pick one over the others to read for the end of time. I think they each have their own benefits and their strengths. And you know, at the end of the day, I just love books.
Yes.
So give them to me in whatever format.
Stories.
And I will figure out how to read them.
That's so there's one other that we actually don't have listed here. One of the reasons is I've never actually done it, but Amazon offers WhisperSync, where you get the print and the audiobook, and wherever you last left off in print, it will play for you in audio, and then when you pause that and go back to the print, it will fast forward basically your Kindle version to that point. Have you ever used that? Have you ever tried that?
No, I have not, but I was sorely tempted to with The Wise Man's Fear, because this is consumed because it's a 44-hour book, 42 hours and 55-minute book. It's ridiculous. So if you're trying to make progress and actually get through it in a reasonable amount of time, you know, I mean, I've been reading it for most of the summer,
right? Because
of that. So I will say the other format we didn't talk about, which is out there that I don't know it well enough to actually be able to read in it, is Braille, which I find fascinating.
Yes.
You know, we encounter it in terms of like, because we raise seeing eye dogs. You know, we've know blind folks, and they'll talk about reading with Braille and the skill of reading with Braille. And it fascinates me. I'd love to learn it at some point. It's not a skill I imagine I'll need to use all that much, but who knows? Life takes strange turns. But the idea of reading by scanning bumps on a page.
Yeah.
And the technology has gotten to the point now where you have like the transforming blocks, which will actually reshape.
Yes.
To create the little dots that you need to read the Braille. I'm sure there's a technical term for those. But the idea that you could actually read at speed or close to speed in that case is kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
But I haven't added any Braille books to my summer reading list.
Yeah. Years ago, my mom was computer science professor, and so I would come in sometimes and help tutor like the beginning computer science people who had not had any programming experience and were just getting into computer science. And one of the people that I helped out was a blind student of hers who was learning computer programming. And so we sat down on a terminal, a Unix terminal. The keyboard had Braille on it, and so he could type. But what was interesting is, and it would speak what he was typing back to him. So he'd type a line, and then it would speak that line when he was done, when he hit return. So you could listen to it and hear any errors that he might have put in there, like missing a semicolon or something, or misspelling a word. Luckily, these were not very complex programs, because in addition, so he had to learn how to do that, but I also had to learn how to do that because the monitor was broken on that machine. And they're like, we don't have to fix this monitor because this is for all the blind students. Why would we need a working monitor on this terminal that's for blind students? And so here I was, he and I would both listen to the code, and he and I would try and figure out where the syntax error is, if there was one, before he continued on to the next line. And that was 30 years ago, probably. So I'm hoping things are much better now. In terms of that, like having that shifting blocks way to read books, you can probably read code that way too,
right?
Which would be pretty darn cool to be able to do that as well. So you wouldn't even need a monitor at that point either. They kind of have something like that in Sneakers.
Yeah, I think that's true. I haven't seen. Now you make me want to go watch Sneakers again.
Yeah,
it's a great movie.
Yeah, it's a good movie. Yeah, I don't know that I will ever learn to read Braille because I don't need to, but it is definitely a very cool thing that is actually out there for those people who do use it. So
right. So which all brings me back to I think my ultimate point, which is I'm not going to go out there and say, well, what you're doing isn't reading.
Right.
There's a lot of different ways to get the ideas from your media into your brain, and if you're ingesting it, I think I'm going to be willing to call that some form of reading.
Right. Are movies reading?
No.
Yeah.
because it's inherently a visual medium, right?
Yeah. But comic books are reading.
Comic books are reading.
So
books are definitely reading.
I'll pause this here, and our audience can decide whether or not other forms of media are also reading. I've got my own opinions.
That's a beautiful segue into kind of closing out the show. So we talked quite a lot. So thanks everybody for listening. If you had feedback, including your opinions on what is and is not reading, your preferred ways of reading, which of these form factors you like, we'd love feedback. We don't have the email at this time for this recording because we haven't created it yet, but we're going to do that real soon. So we do have a site, and you can come visit us at lairofsecrets.com and leave us some feedback, topic ideas, or your own thoughts on this and other topics. So this has been